Hey, Connor Harbison, welcome to the Distro Boss Podcast. You're the owner and founder of Atlas Urban Farms. You're in the hydroponic space, bringing the farm to the inside, to the kitchen, to the city. It's a really interesting business to be in. It's a growth sector, and it's also a scary place to start a business right now, especially when there's like a lot of big money going in. There's a lot of big money being pulled out of it. So, thank you for taking the time to be here. I'd love to pick your brain on how you're building and what you're building in this marketplace.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I completely agree. It's a really I'm a little biased, but I think it's a great time to be in this space. But you sort of have to understand there's some, like you said, some really big companies that are doing really poorly. Um, my attitude is they're showing us all how not to do a business with this technology, um, and we can all learn from them and sort of do things a little bit different, and hopefully be successful in the future.
Yeah, because it's like my experience with this is very limited, but it's like it's been a really interesting thing for me because when I was first introduced to like the world of hydroponics, and I'll be honest with you, the pink light, where it comes to like growing some kind of plant has only ever been something I would link to smoking weed. You know, in my
Yeah,
university days, we'd have a cupboard
question a
somewhere
lot.
and someone would be growing it themselves. You know what I mean? So that was
Yeah,
the only
yeah.
understanding I had of hydroponics. And then a couple of years ago, and I say a couple of years ago, it was around like 2016 or 2015. I was in Brooklyn, New York, and I came across a company called Square Yards. It was Elon Musk's
Yeah.
brother, Kimball Musk, and another guy, Tobias something, I forget his name. And they had these like urban farms set up, and it was the first time I heard of like an urban farm, and it was these storage boxes they had in the parking lot, where each storage box had all these like plants, like this produce growing in there without any soil. They were I didn't have to have any pesticides or anything like that because there were sealed environments, as in, i.e., the door was closed and it didn't have to open until things were fine and you could pick the plants out. Um, and of course, they were controlled by some kind of interesting AI or just a computer system that would regulate the temperatures inside here. So no matter what temperature it was outside, whether it was blaring hot heat or freezing cold, these things would always be in like the most prime growth environment. And I figured because it was Kimball Musk and it was Elon Musk's brother, this is going to be this huge growth sector. And so I started paying attention. But then lo and behold, a few years later, he pulls out of that whole deal. That whole thing comes crumbling down. I've seen a lot of money being poured in where companies are building like retrofitting older buildings, bringing the farm to the city, and then then these investments go flop because like the money just dries up. People decide not to keep on spending money building up this infrastructure, but there's so many benefits. So like knowing that this is a growth market, it's almost like the I got to stop talking because this is where you need to speak. There's so much here that I want to know, and I know you're the brains behind it. So let you tell me how is it being in that world? What are you doing? What is Atlas Urban Farms? How are you breaking in?
Yeah. So a lot there. I'm going to start with us. We
Yeah.
started doing this about 3 years ago. Initially, we were not looking to build a device, and our device is right here.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's small. That's like the smallest thing I've seen.
it
I was
is,
talking
yeah,
about storage boxes that go on like container ships. That's in the home.
yeah. And there's a reason we got to this size. We weren't trying to do a device. We weren't trying to be a hardware company. We saw this technology out there. We said, let's buy it from someone else and let's operate it because it a lot of the devices out there are designed so that just anybody off the street can run them. You don't have to be a botanist. You don't have to be a farmer. You can have a pretty brown thumb. You don't have to have a green thumb. You can kill a lot of plants and still run these things and grow food. And we were going to, set them up in corporate offices and schools and apartments, and then do events around them, like grow a bunch of fresh herbs and bring in a mixologist and do like cooking or mixology lessons. And we thought that was pretty cool. But it was right around the end of the pandemic, and people were still a little wary of events. And it really was a hey, this is cool, but we don't want to pay for it. And that's a really terrible way to start a business. So we sort of went back to the drawing board and surveyed a bunch of different other segments, retirement homes, different levels of schools, talked to some governments, nonprofits, but we spoke to some chefs and learned that food waste is something that happens a lot in restaurants. It's not necessarily a headache for them. So I'd been going about this like, hey, this is a much more sustainable way to grow food. Like everybody should be doing this. If we can do it at scale, we can so much better for the environment. And I think everybody's for sustainability until you ask them to write a check, and then it's like, well, I have this other thing, and like, so we've actually de-emphasized that. It's more like, hey, we can grow a bunch of food. We have a lot of control over it. It's energy efficient. Oh, and by the way, it's much better for the environment.
Yeah.
And that was a big learning. But we moved into the restaurant market. Spent about 9 months trying to talk to them, and that's when this really became a hardware company, a device company, because we had to own the physical piece. Everything else out there was just not suited to that, to a restaurant, which is a very specific environment. And during that time, we learned a lot. We learned a lot about building. We learned a lot about sort of the operations of a restaurant, which I think are the barrier to entry for that world. And we also learned, they're not going to be our early adopters. So we actually moved on from restaurants to a segment called research chefs. These are food scientists. These are people developing recipes. And we scaled the device down. It was originally supposed to be about 3 feet wide by 2 feet tall, and about 40 to 50 plants. This is 5 plants.
So you've had to pivot a few times. You've had to switch from one,
yes.
like if you had like if you've spent like, I just wanted to talk on that for a second, because
Yeah,
when
sure.
companies take time, spend money on advertising, resources, they go out and they meet, they do the networking necessary. They meet companies and they build up this Rolodex, this email list, this audience base, in one specific sector. Like for instance, you said they're restaurants, and then you have to then pivot and switch. We have to go for research centers, and you haven't got a list. Is this something that you had to then build again? Like, how do you pivot like that without just going under?
Yeah. I think part of it is keeping our costs low. We're still pre-revenue. So everything we do is like, how can we do this as quickly, as cheaply, as efficiently as possible? We've been extremely capital efficient. To develop something like this typically takes 50 to 100K. We did it for about 5K. So just everything we do is super lean. And I don't think it was, it wasn't like, okay, one day we're doing restaurants, one day we're doing research. It was an evolution. I think the real inflection point came. We were looking, okay, restaurants are going to be, and then let's also talk to some other sort of adjacent and sort of see who raises their hand. And I went to a conference. I was invited to speak, and I gave a talk about what we're doing, some of the science, some of where we want to go, etc. And that was all research chefs. 75% of the audience signed up for our waiting list. And I was like, oh, this is our target market. Great. They told us, the customer told us, great. And then we had their emails, and then we sort of,
That's brilliant.
went from there. Yeah.
You listened to the customer. The customer said, "Hey, this is what
Yeah.
we want." And what did you have?
Yeah.
And you remodel your product for them? Is that what happened?
No, I wouldn't say remodeled it so much as learned that there were some features that we sort of just had, that are fairly in the weeds. It comes down to like voltages and certain components. So I probably won't get too much into that, but certain capacities we had, it was like, oh, this was just like, we're using this component because it's half the price of the other component that we might use, but it gives us different capabilities, and those capabilities we can use. Example, the control board we have on this generates a Wi-Fi network. So this is an IoT device. We didn't plan it as an IoT device, but just because we wanted to save some money, it got that capacity. Now that it's an IoT device, we can send instructions from online, so we can adjust it on the fly. So we can give that control over to our users and say, you can adjust things on the fly. You can be on vacation and you can tell your thing, stop watering, or adjust the lights. And that plays into this research, people who want to be testing and doing experiments, versus the restaurants, which are much more like, I want my volume. I don't really care about anything else. I don't want to have to think about it. So it's two very different problem sets and
wow,
capacities.
that's like,
yeah.
So are you saying that, like, and this is just me going with a harebrained idea here, is this like you could have some kind of management tool, whether it's something that you use manually from a headquarters, if you will, even AI, and have this thing automatically adjust settings, temperature settings, hydration settings, anything to do with the growth of, well, botany generally. And you can have this thing just take in the environment of wherever each one of these units are at, and then produce the best growth conditions for whatever it's growing and know what it's growing.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And
So
you didn't.
so we don't control the temperature. That's one of the big differentiators between us and everyone else. It also means that we spend maybe half a cent on electricity per day, versus other hydroponic and controlled environment ag devices and setups. More than 50% of their energy usage is on energy. More than 50% of their cost is on energy, because heating and cooling is very expensive. So we're much more energy efficient. We didn't aim to do that. We just, hey, we don't need a big expensive HVAC system. Let's just bare bones. A lot of it comes back to this lean approach that we've had. And it's just, how can we get from here to here fastest? And like, oh, we discovered this along the way. Great. Throw it in.
Yeah. And it could, like, I guess it's like, for me, when I look at that, I'm almost thinking like that's like your product that you could bring to the market, like to the masses. I mean, where it's kind of like, it doesn't maybe have all the bells and whistles like you would expect from like, a big, heavily invested vertical farm in a huge building somewhere where everything's temperature controlled, everything's got like, everything's, dialed to the nines. But like, this is something that, I mean, I could even have in my home. Somebody could have, because it is that small. Like you pick that up, it's like about the size of a torso. It's not that big. Is it heavy? No, that's not heavy.
No.
Those are fingertips. You're using fingertips.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know it in metric, but empty it's 4 pounds, full it's 7 pounds. So you can lift it, carry it. It's pretty
and it's crazy to I mean, I've been to, when I went to that square roots event, I did try what they told me was basil, and I was like, no, this isn't that. And he like, yeah, this is that. It tastes completely different from what you get in the store. And they were saying that, like, and what they had told me at the time was that the case for this is that you don't really know truly what an apple tastes like. You don't actually know what basil tastes. You think you know because that's what you buy. But what's happened is they're producing this thing en masse at farms miles and miles away. There's all this transport and logistics to get it to you. And then, okay, they have a consistency in terms of the taste profile for their entire crop. And so you think that that's basil or basil. Like, I say basil or basil because I have English people.
Yeah, that's
as well. So I'm like, but it's like, but when you taste it from something like this hydroponic growing, it's like, this isn't something that's different. This is actually what it's meant to taste like. And it's crazy because it's like so full of flavor. It's like it's almost like having one of those like sours almost. Like it's an explosion on your taste buds. So yeah, you're going to say something on that.
I have a lot to say on that.
Tell me about it. Everyone wants to hear it.
Yeah. So I know the numbers for the US, but I would imagine places like Europe are somewhat similar. I know in the US, food typically journeys about 1,500 miles to get to your plate. We grow all our food in California, and let me tell you, in Boston, that's clear across the country. It typically takes about a week to arrive. Something like a spinach loses not all of its, only 90% of its nutrients in the first 48 hours after being harvested.
Only 90.
Only 90. You're still getting that 10%. But yeah, I mean, basil, the reason we like basil is because it has a short shelf life. So you always want it to be fresh. You always want it to be right there growing. And the idea with this is that you have it growing and you're just picking a handful every few days, and you're not getting a huge harvest because you don't need that. One of the reasons I started this and started growing food in my apartment was because I was a poor grad student living alone in a small apartment in Boston. And I would go and I'd buy, kale or spinach or something at the grocery store, and they sell it for 2 people or more people. and I would eat like half of it and the rest would go bad because it'd be in the back of my fridge. And it's something I call sad spinach, you know, when it's been back there and you forget about it. And then it's sort of like this gross slime and you throw it away and then you go and buy more. And like 2 weeks later, you have more sad spinach. So I
Well,
did
I
what
know
any
about
normal
that,
person.
man.
Yeah,
I buy a lot of that stuff with the intent to eat it, and I don't. It sits at the back of the fridge
exactly.
where it's freezing cold, and it just gets frozen on the
Yeah.
back wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't
It's,
work.
yeah. So I did what any normal person would do. And I built a hydroponic system and I started growing my own kale. And it was like the most expensive kale. I think it worked out to like $1,000 a pound, but it was mine.
Mm.
And then I was like, oh, I could do this. I could figure this out. But to your point about the flavor, it largely comes from that freshness because you're eating it right after or within a day, or I think that's the big benefit of hydroponics and controlled environment agriculture and vertical farming, which are all sort of overlapping terms. They mean slightly different things, but I'll probably use vertical farming and hydroponics interchangeably.
Mm.
But you can locate it where people are. And if you look at history, I studied history in undergrad. Throughout most of human history, we've grown food where we lived. This idea that we grow food thousands of miles away and then ship it across countries and across oceans, that's a pretty recent thing. It's only, 50, 100 years old. It's not that old. So I have this amazing cookbook called Six Seasons, and it's based in New England, and it has summers divided into three. That's why it's six, not four seasons. But it's really great. It's basically go out and get whatever fresh vegetables are available and cook with that, and just cook whatever's in season. But the postscript at the very end, the chef, the author, Joshua McFadden, has this really lovely note, and then he says, "P.S. Don't buy tomatoes in winter because they're not in season. You're going to get like watery, flavorless tomatoes, and they're not going to be good." So it's I think our mission with Atlas is to sort of democratize and free and allow people to grow food, whatever food they want, when they want it, whether it's the middle of January or the middle of summer, whether it's too hot or too cold. But I think too that we have to understand, like, we have to eat what's fresh, what's not just, hey, I want strawberries all year round. Like, no, eat strawberries when they're in season, eat tomatoes when they're in season, eat kale, eat, Brussels sprouts, whatever it may be. Don't get butternut squash unless there's frost on your window.
Yeah. So we don't
So
really know those things, like as the average Joe,
we
it's like,
don't. No,
it's like, I just think go to the supermarket. Let me see what their selection is. Oh, this place is crappy because they don't have a big enough selection. Let me go to the next place that seems to have a bigger grocery, like the grocery section for like plants and whatnot. And you kind of cherry pick where you do your big shop every week. I'm gonna get a bulk buy at Costco, and then I'm gonna go buy my nice trimmings over here, and I'm gonna get all my produce from over there. It's like I don't ever think, it doesn't ever register that I need to consider the timing of the year for what I should be eating. And it's also, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and that's not like a consumer, like the food industry has been built to do that, to like, hey, we can grow a lot of this stuff really cheaply and it's all the same. Going back to what you said earlier about the apples, about this certain flavor range, and people can market it and sell it, and it just keeps going. And I think we're poorer for it. We're less healthy for it. Yeah.
So when I'm considering like why some of these businesses aren't working, because when I think of it, it sounds like a no-brainer, right? I when I envision like my dream kitchen, I imagine having a fridge being the typical fridge, and then I imagine like there being another fridge, like a walk-in one, or maybe just a bigger unit that I open it, just pink glare, that this is all hydroponics, and I've got all the best stuff I want. I've got the kale, I've got the spinach in there, tomatoes, and what have you. And these are like my staples, and I can have them consistently throughout the year. And I'm like, okay, it seems like such a good business model. Why isn't it become mainstream already? And I've seen lots of like real estate developments where new ones where they're building in these these urban farms, these city farms within the building, so that all residents of the building can now have access to this kind of community farm that everyone kind of chips into. And of course, everyone can then get a certain quantity of X, whatever's being produced in there. I know that schools, even especially in Manhattan, where I was living for the last 8 years, it was like there was a lot of the schools that I was familiar with. My wife is a psychotherapist and she works in the school, the DOE, and I remember hearing about the schools now in the cafeterias having it there. They had these hydroponic. I don't know if they were boxes, but they definitely had a vertical farm in
Yeah.
there. So I can see like there are institutions that are really leading the charge with it, and there are like developments that are using it as a value add for residents, but I haven't seen it fully take off. And I feel like I also haven't seen the smaller, more nimble businesses like what you're representing, which is why I really wanted to speak to you, because you represent the sort of direct to consumer model where everything else had to be part of the infrastructure somewhere. It had to be part of the bigger business. It's almost like you're now saying, hey, you could put this on your, anyone can have this in their home. So I know you said you're pre-revenue. Like, what would you say the price point on one of those? Like, what can people pick those up for? What do you hope you can bring the price down to?
So we are going to begin selling this for about $200.
That's a good price. That's a good price.
We expect a yield of about $20 to $30 of produce per month. It might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit less, but looking at about a 6-month payback period. There will be, continuing fees for seeds, and seedlings, and nutrients, and that sort of thing. But we're also looking at, and this is something no one else has, some ways to get it under the umbrella of organic certification. So this is not, hydroponics are not inherently organic. And I actually don't know the regulations in Europe, but I am somewhat familiar with them in the US. There's a lot of contention around that, but a lot of it is consumer perceptions. There's not really, organic is a great example. People know what organic is, or they have an idea of what organic is a brand in people's mind, right? Hydroponic or vertical farming is not. I was actually at a grocery store about a month ago, and I saw a wall. They had a whole section of hydroponic lettuce, and I knew it was hydroponic lettuce because I had the companies, but none of them said hydroponic. They all said, greenhouse grown, or like pesticide free, or all of these other things that weren't hydroponic. And I think the challenge with a lot of these bigger companies is they're having their tech companies, their infrastructure companies, their hardware companies. They have these huge capital expenditures on the front end to create and develop this hardware, and then they're selling a commodity that's the same that in consumers' minds is the same as anything that comes out of the ground. Like, we grow lettuce. We have some really beautiful lettuce. Lettuce isn't very sexy, but it's one of the few crops that you can grow economically. You can't grow everything hydroponically, and not yet. Root vegetables are probably not going to happen, but staples are really tough. So wheat, rice, corn, can't really do that. You're really limited to leafy greens, herbs, and tomatoes or small fruits, which is unfortunate because a lot of people like to eat a lot of things. So you have these larger companies, the Boweries, the App Harvest, the Harrow Farms, In Farms, that are not doing very well business wise, because they've been spending a ton of money to build out their infrastructure, and then they've been selling this commodity, and economics there don't really work out.
I thought it was like, yeah, that's really interesting, because when I initially thought of it, my brain just kind of went to, they're not surviving because they're fighting against sort of legacy contracts, pre-existing relationships, and they can't break into that because these contracts are, like you said, because hydroponics doesn't cover the entire spectrum of produce. So where contracts are pre-existing that do cover the spectrum, it's kind of like, well, we already have this thing in place. If we chop up the contract and say, hey, we don't want this, they have to write a new one. They had a price point that they were perhaps legacied in that gave them a really good margin. Now they're not going to benefit from that anymore. So by doing this, it's kind of like a bad business case. And that's what I was initially thinking. That's what I was like, if investment money can get behind the idea, because it's very easy to see it working. It doesn't take much. You put the box up, you get the lights working, you get the temperature right, and the nutrients in the right places, drip fed at the right time, and then you actually have a result. It's one of those beautiful things. Like there's an actual product that comes out that you can eat, and it works. And it's like, so it just makes sense. You watch enough TV shows about this stuff now, and movies. I remember thinking back to that Martian movie by Andy Weir. He was it Watney, the botanist. Yeah, making those potatoes on Mars. Yeah, that's it. Mark Watney. I love that movie. I read the book. It was great. But that is an example, like, of every time you see it, it's like, why isn't that more common? And then so when I initially thought of it, it was this problem with legacy contracts, and the fact that you're saying the spectrum. But how do you break that? How do you scale this up? And that's why I think your business is cool, by the way, because I think you can bring it into the home first, make it accessible to it. But you tell me.
Yeah, I think you're partially right. I think there have been a lot of, especially when we were talking to the restaurants, they would say, look, we get all of our food, whether it's steaks or parsley or butter or whatever it might be, all comes from one supplier. So it's all just a line item on one bill. And that used to be 4 or 5 or 6 suppliers, purveyors, and all concentrated during the pandemic. So I think the companies that started, 5 or 6 years ago probably had an easier time breaking those contracts. And now it's like, well, why would I break my leafy greens, or why would I break my herbs or tomatoes out and have a separate contractor when everything's from one place? But I think at the same time, a lot of these, the Boweries, the Arrow Farms, App Harvests, Little Leaf Farms, they've found good success selling into like Whole Foods, and sort of upmarket places like that. I really do think it comes down to, you have high expenditures, high costs. One of the big facilities it's a $100 million facility. So how are you going to amortize that selling lettuce, selling a commodity that can't really compete on price?
It's kind of like the same situation as like the solar model, the solar energy model, or even the electric car. It's like, it kind of, if you were to follow their case study, you could imagine you'd have to start at something really expensive so you could cash flow, so that you can then produce something that's more cost effective. It's like you've started with the smaller product.
Tesla.
So that's interesting. It's like, I'm really interested to know, like, okay, you know what? Let's do this. Let me find, how did you get involved with this from the very beginning? Let me bring it back. How did you get into the business? Because I feel like we've had there's a lot of information we've covered so far as framing the situation. Yes, it's an interesting, I want to talk to you about like some of the problems that you faced as a company, as a business, as a startup entrepreneur. And I want to swing it right back around to how you can scale the business towards the end of that conversation. But I do want to find out, how did you get into it? How did you?
Sure.
What was your aha moment, your epiphany? Like, this is the road I'm going down.
I think there were a lot of like little aha moments, and maybe just call them that's interesting. Now this all started, I was camping in Grand Teton National Park. You might have seen me drink from my water bottle. These are all national parks I've been to.
Awesome.
I lived in Montana for 3 years, and I camped like everywhere. I just hop in my car and drive 12 hours to get to the mountains or something. And, that'd be my weekend. But I was in Grand Teton National Park, and I came down into Jackson, Wyoming after a hike one day. And I wanted to get a beer and get some food at the brewery. And across the street was this big glass and steel building. And I don't know if you've ever been to Jackson, but they have an arch made out of like elk antlers or something in the main square. It's very, it's a little touristy, leans into like the Western vibe, but a big glass and steel building. And by the way, it had the pink lights on the inside, sticks out like a sore thumb. So I was like, what is that? What is this thing that's like, and it had Vertical Harvest on it, which is a great company. They're in Jackson, Wyoming, and Philadelphia and Maine. And that was my first vertical farm I ever saw. I was like, that's super cool. That's the future. And then I didn't think about it for 3 years. I did some stuff in Montana. I started a software company, didn't go anywhere, but it's like, oh, this is really cool. I like this. So I applied and got into Babson College, which is where I am right now. I'm at the Makerspace. It's where we build all of our stuff. And coming into business school, I knew I wanted to graduate with a startup. And I had a couple ideas, like what if we could like genetically modify like mushrooms to eat plastic and then like sprinkle them on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch? Like not business ideas, just like, that'd be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Um, but I kept
World
coming back to
changing
this.
business models here. Like,
Yeah, yeah, just like what can I do that's like the biggest thing that like I definitely don't have the skills for. But I kept coming back to the idea of urban food supply. Just like everybody needs to eat, can't get away from that. And the world is urbanizing very quickly. Um, to the point, I think most of us live in cities now. By 2050, it's going to be something overwhelming, like 75 or 80%. So and I had seen these vertical farms, like these things can come together. People need to eat. People live in cities. We have the technology to grow food in the city. Wouldn't it be better if we did that? And the original idea was, I'm going to build a vertical farm in every neighborhood, and you're going to have your food right around the corner. It's going to grow there, and we're going to eliminate food deserts, and food insecurity is going to be gone. And I did that, and then we're super successful. It was very, I was so naive. I was extremely naive about it, but that sort of got me into this. I started thinking. I looked at a couple of different businesses. I realized I didn't want to sell food. I wanted to sort of have the experience, and that's what I mentioned earlier about using the technology to partner with like chefs and mixologists and do events around it and use the technology to empower the experience. And that business didn't work out, but it taught me how to build these things and how to operate them, and that allowed me and my team to build these and sort of play with it really well. I'm thinking about
and you've built these things. And
yeah,
can I just interject for just a second? Because
yeah.
from a startup perspective, a lot of conversations I've had, at least with people about like starting businesses, when they talk about clothing lines, people talk about software. Software is a common one because, okay, if I can do this, I can get developers, I can go on Fiverr or Upwork, I can find people. You're not always, I mean, truth be told, it's very difficult to actually get great products from those mediums, but mentally you can see a very direct route to access that kind of skill set to build what you want. Equally, when it comes to clothing brands, you're immediately like, before I need to build my own manufacturing outlet or a unit, place somewhere, that's like I can go to Alibaba or Express or wherever I can pull stuff in. So you have this way to access the market. When it comes to what you're doing, which is actually constructing a unique box, and it has a specific set of functions, and so it needs to be built in a certain way. You need a certain type of material where you've got to pick them. You've got to find something that works, right? As a startup entrepreneur, where do you go? Like, is this something that you go to like a workshop somewhere, you put it together, and then is there like a service somewhere that you can say, hey, this is my prototype, can you go ahead and build this thing? Or how do you build a box like that, a physical
There's
product?
certainly, there certainly are people who I think I shouldn't stereotype, but will prey on early stage people who have a dream and a slide deck. Um, I think even if you're going to build like a crappy version of it, like I think there's a lot of benefit to building it yourself and learning that and getting that. Like, I'm not an engineer. I can tell you exactly how many there's 32 of one type of screw and 8 of another type of screw in this. I can tell you exactly how many square inches of material we use. I can tell you down to the gram how much resin we use for the reservoirs, because I've done 30 of them. Like I know this granularly. Um, and I think it's really important for founders to know their product to that detail. Um, and like, look, if you're not a software engineer and you're trying to build a AI platform, like maybe don't do that business. Um, I think part of it is like your personal skills, but the place I first learned to do this is I went to YouTube and I found a design. Actually, no, I Googled hydroponic designs. I found an article that was like 15 hydroponic designs you can do at home. and I picked the one that looked the coolest. You know, it was a tower, and I found a YouTube video, and it was like $200 in materials, plus I had to buy like a drill and a jigsaw. And I started it in my garage, and then I finished it at this makerspace that I had access to as a student. And certainly the equipment here and the expertise of the staff have helped me along. I've just sort of learned on my feet. And then as it was more developed, we joined a hardware incubator, which didn't take equity, that helped us develop this version. And then we've taken it from there. So it's been a lot of learning on my feet, a lot of learning by doing, messing up. That tower made largely out of PVC, and it has 20 slots that, just think of like a cylinder at a 45-degree angle. To make the 20, I had to cut 40 of them. I had to cut 60 of them. Right. Yeah. Cause I just kept messing up, and like it would,
Wow.
I have a picture somewhere of just a bunch of shattered ones. Like, yep.
This is one way not to make it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the Thomas Edison thing. Like I learned 2,000 ways not to build a light bulb, you know?
Yeah.
And I've done it enough times. I've made enough mistakes where I can be like, okay, this is the problem. We need to make this fix. Done. To the degree where that tower took me 2 months to build. A month ago, from scratch, we built a completely different system for germinating our plants. So going from seed to seedling, that sort of 0 to 1. And we built it in like half an hour. And now we have 60 plants growing in it.
Wow.
And that'll feed these, and it'll also bring down our cost by 95%. And I just got the materials to 5x that system, and now we're gonna start building it much larger.
Yeah. How many of these things can you like make now? Can you take orders, like big order? Like if you got what would be like a tidal wave type of order? If someone said, "Hey, we want like 1,000 of these," like
yeah, we can.
How
do
long
that.
would it?
We've had people be like, "What if I wanted 100?" And I say, "Here's my card. Let me take your email." We are trying to learn our way through the process, because we're not at manufacturing yet. We're not to the point where we go to a contract manufacturer, but once we do, we want the recipe, so to speak, to be baked. All my metaphors are food metaphors.
Yeah. We need it baked.
Because yeah, because if we make a mistake there, it's very expensive. It's tens of thousands of dollars to redo it. If we make a mistake now, okay, you know, we spent a little bit of money on it. It's okay. Typically, we can repurpose a lot of the materials. If something breaks, we can replace it. It's okay. So I'd rather take our time now and really get things right. But you know, to that degree, to that point, you know, we're having some issues. Not issues. We're testing out a couple different sort of internal configurations, and that has different outcomes for the plants. And to really get a handle on that, we're now doing a lot of tests on saturation. So understanding, okay, you know, the top right one's getting fully soaked, but this one isn't getting enough water, but this one is, you know, so how do we make them all get the same amount of water? The benefit of that is that we're going, it's another plant metaphor, super deep in the weeds on it. And that means we're going to be able to calibrate these things. Let's say it's a 10-point scale, and basil prefers a 6.7, right? Or, you know, a 3.2, whatever the number is, right? Of saturation. We're going to, because we're doing all of these tests, because we are really doing our homework, we're going to be able to say, okay, we need to run it on this cycle and do this. And it'll have basil right there, versus everyone else is, we put it up to a 10 and let it go down to a 1, and then put it back up to a 10, let it go down to a 1. And certainly you hit that sweet spot at one point, but it's most of the time it's outside of that sweet spot.
You can optimize. You can create boxes optimized for. It's almost like you could have the basil box, the tomato box, like you could almost like create them for different specific, you know, like,
so
what do you like most?
We're gonna have growing profiles. Yeah, we're gonna have growing profiles
set for this.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the hardware is the same, software interface is the same. You'll be able to say, I'm growing basil. And beyond that, you can say, oh, I want it to be really spicy, or I want it to be really sweet, or I want to grow leaves that are bigger than my hand. We've done that. And have that pinpoint control. I sort of describe it as, the food system
That's
now is like,
actually amazing. That's actually
thank you.
amazing. That
Thank you
is
very
really,
much.
because that is brilliant
Thank you.
to be able to, and to, if it's like an app as well, like on a phone, like
Mm-hmm.
this is something I think anyone who's like, look, almost like probably most people in New York City. I
Yeah.
mean, I could see picking that up. I mean, that just seems like such a cool thing to have. Like, I want it. This is the kind of profile I want for my vegetable. And if you
Yeah.
can make that a normal thing,
Yeah.
that is, and the price points scaled at like what, $200, and maybe you have like a membership like fee for the app itself. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm starting to think like this now. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's your continuity program? What's your products that, like this is a really good offering.
Thank
And
you.
there's and again, this is again one of those things. Once I understand the logic and the methodology behind it, I can't imagine it not working. Like, this is something that is I think you're right there at the cusp, right? Well,
Thank
so
you.
what do you do
I really
now?
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Now we're getting it out to people. So we've been doing a ton of testing internally. We not so much that we have the problem solved, but we know how to solve them. I think one of the biggest challenges is that we're moving. I joke, like, we move at the speed of plants, and hydroponics grows 2 to 3 times faster than traditional, like in the soil agriculture. Think of it like you're eating a meal and you have to digest it in your stomach versus having an IV. It goes right into your bloodstream. That's hydroponics. Um, but our tests take at least a week, sometimes longer. Sometimes if the watering or light cycle is just a little bit off, after a week it's going to be like a little bit off, but the longer it goes, the more it's going to diverge, and we have to sort of wait for that to happen. We're testing a few different types of plants, and each one's going to have different settings, because people want what they want.
So
It goes back to what I
you've
said.
gone from like the farming model, the vertical farming model, hydroponics being like the unique selling point, the thing that gives it the buzz, to like it becoming a tech company where it's the tech
We are a tech
side of
company.
this, it's
Yeah.
the software, this is,
Yeah.
this is the unit for the house. This is the unit for the kitchen. This is the unit for the restaurant. This is the unit for wherever
Yeah.
it's going to be. You can have purpose built for different places, but the real value add is in the way you can manipulate what's being grown in there. And to be able to have that kind of control and that profile choice, like as an app, that's really, I'm thinking, why that's a big investment opportunity too. I mean, I could almost see this thing being sold through influencers, like, hey, this is what I got in my kitchen. It's like a foodie influence, and I could see you having like thousands of them promoting this, pitching this, and that sort of thing.
I
think you
think
got to
something
get your
that would be
manufacturing down.
cool. Yeah, I think something that would be cool is once we get enough people using them and sort of seeing them connect over this, and like, oh, I have this growing profile and I grew this and then I cooked this with this, and then people are like, oh, I'm going to try that too. And what if you do this, and sort of really, we want to build this sandbox and let other people. With the chefs, I say, like, look, I like to cook. I am not a professionally trained chef. The people I speak to are insane. They're insanely talented. They're just the things they do and accomplish in the kitchen and do with food are just so impressive. My goal is not to tell them what to do or how to do it. My goal is to give them better set of a better set of paintbrushes, better canvas, and let them go create art.
Well, yeah, that's that. So what if you went to, that's amazing. Because what if you went to like
Thank you.
6 of those top level chefs that you've spoken to and said, hey, look, I want you to put a recipe, like make your own 6 seasons cookbook. And like, like, you know what I mean? Like, you have your own cookbook just for this, but like a bunch of different chefs where that they have the skill set, and the experience and the name, and let them produce something for this. And you kind of, that's like, I'm thinking of this model that I've I learned from a guy called Russell Brunson as this internet marketer. Like, he had this thing where you have this giveaway, and then you have the product, and then you have the continuity model. So it's like, you'd have this book is like, here, learn how to do this. This is how you can have
cool.
this, like, learn how to like, this is kind of like the bait to get you into that sort of funnel, which is like the book, that you can read that will give you all these awesome recipes, and you can kind of talk about flavor profiles and whatnot, and then say, but if you want to do it yourself and have the best out of this, you want to have this thing, so buy it. It's $200 and it's on back order, so you have to wait 6 weeks for it. But like it gives up the exclusivity, or there's only going to be 400 of them available between these months. So if you want them, it's first come first serve. So make it, it's only $200. So people have $200, and so it's like you could even jump that price up a little bit. So I'm kind of thinking of this sales model here where you have that, and then you've got this continuity model, this membership model along with it, which is you pay monthly for the app that gives you the ability to manage those profiles. And I could see you growing, man. Like, and then you can go, that's the direct to consumer model, which could give you the cash flow that you need and the exposure that you need. And then you can go to like the next level up, which is like, okay, so how do we then cater to the restaurant in a big way?
Yeah.
Because now it's not about picking you because of your what product you have per se. It's more to do with aligning themselves with your brand, and because you can deliver some level of consistency, and there's also that sort of home brand as well that people can align themselves with. I don't know, I'm just going off on one now I'm starting to just think that you could get a lot of investment money behind it.
We're trying to do things very differently. Just looking at some of those bigger companies, looking at companies that aren't even in this space, different hardware companies, even looking at just a lot of different business models and saying, how can we learn from everyone and apply it here? And having fun with it. That germination design that I made like a month ago, that's now just cranking out seedlings. I told my team, I was like, so I want to scale up Arnold. And they were like, who's Arnold? I was like, Arnold, the Germinator. And I think like that's gonna be the name of that like
the Germinator.
Design. Because they were like, oh, it's on the same platform as the minis. This is the mini, so we call it, and it's like unit like 000 whatever. I was like, no, it needs a new name. Arnold, great. Arnold 1, Arnold 2. It doesn't, right. But we have fun with it. We don't take ourselves too seriously.
Germinator 2, like
and that's also going to be modular. We're planning to put them on carts and stack them 8 feet tall. Vertical farming. So
that's brilliant. All right, so okay, what has, I guess, now it's a silly question to ask you, what's your biggest challenge? Because I think you're constantly met with challenges right now, but has there been anything that's like made you think, me throwing the towel, screw this, like I'm going to switch gears again? Like what has there been a moment like that? Like what is it? Yes, tell me.
In July, I went to this massive conference, like 20,000 people. I had a booth. I talked to hundreds of people. It's crazy. And apparently that was a small conference for the food industry. And I had this feeling, when you're at the top of the diving board, or maybe when you're at the roller coaster just about to go down, I was like, oh, this is a much larger, like the food industry is much larger than and I think I was a little burnt out. Since then I've been sort of prioritizing it. Hey, this is time for me to rest. And that's work too. It doesn't have to be, I'm cranking away at building physical things, or, today we're doing the balance sheet, or, any of that inventory. Taking care of myself is important too. I know that's like a cliche, like, oh, self-care, but making sure that I am at my best, sleeping, eating well, exercising, giving my brain downtime, has been sort of the remedy to that. And I've been pretty good since like August was sort of the low point, I would say. And I think, the last few months have been really fun because things have started happening. I think with anything, it's a roller coaster. There's like, oh man, just euphoric, everything's happening. You get to do really cool things like go on podcasts and have amazing conversations, and the feedback is really fun. And then there are times where it's like, nothing is working, we're not making progress. And that's sort of part of it. And you have to, during those times, you have to understand like, okay, this is temporary. it is, I'm not going to say it's all in your head, but it's probably some component of it is in your head. Some component of it is more about you than the business or the world. And I have a lot of really good friends, a lot of other founders, good support system that I leaned on to help me sort of get through that period. So
And
um,
when it comes to getting through it, like I know some people like they fall on like the mission. It's like, well, listen, the reason I got to stick at this is the mission, because this is, you know, it's going to do this. It's almost like the Elon Musk approach. We go back to him, like, you know, we've got to get people to
yeah,
Mars, you know. But like, with you, is it that, or is it more like this is kind of a legacy project? I need to see this be successful as a business. Like, what's your reason for this? Is it because you know, oh, I've put too much into it now. I identify as this person, and I need to see it be a success. Otherwise, it's gonna reduce my status. I can't have that be like, some people have different reasons for like just grinding through, and where their support system comes into play, it's almost like what button are they pressing that gets you back up? Like, is it the, you know, you've got to be on this mission, you've got to have it done, or you've got to make money because you're broke, or it's you put too much money into it, or it's not, you know, there's lots of different reasons. What would you say is yours?
I'm not sure if there's one. I think part of it is like I like hard challenges. Like if I were trying to do something easy, I'd go start like a B2B SaaS AI company. Not that that's easy, but in terms of fundraising right now, I think it's pretty easy. Um, you know, we're doing plants on top of IoT on top of hardware. Uh,
I mean,
with
AI with what you're doing is a big component. I know that's a big deal.
Actually, that's my next meeting. Is talking
All
to
right.
talking to a researcher, yeah, about, hey, here's a couple ideas. Like, is it worth pursuing this? And we were just talking yesterday. Um, we do think we're going to incorporate some AI. But I'm just wary of like slapping AI on anything and be like, we have AI. It's like, but kind of, you know, that's a tangent. No, I think I'm drawn to like, let me go do the hardest thing that I can do. And this is certainly, I think, up there. You know, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a plant scientist. I studied European history in college, and then I studied entrepreneurship at grad school. I just can teach myself almost anything. Um, Electrical engineering is pretty difficult, I find. Um, but I'm a great electrical engineer. So um, no, I think it's just like, look, so much of this has worked. And I've had a venture before where, you know, it all made sense on paper and I just didn't follow through. And at the time, I didn't know anything about business. So it made sense and I didn't care about the problem. But I think I care very deeply about food. And I think about, you know, us as like humans, as a civilization and our food supply, and both the really, like, you go out to an amazing restaurant and it's art and it's this amazing performance by the chef and the staff, but also the like, we have to eat every day. And if you don't eat for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you are going to die. There's doesn't matter all the tech we have in the world. That is a fact like get gravity. You know,
It's true. I say it a lot in so many. I say this line and I use it for so many different things. I talk about it's all, you know, it all comes down to the meatware behind the hardware, right? It's us.
mm-hmm,
You know, we can talk
mm-hmm,
about AI and robots and all this, but ultimately we have to survive as people, as
yeah,
humans, and
yeah,
we need to put our head down at night. You know,
yeah,
that's not going to change. You can talk about these little sleep chambers as much as you want. We want a home, we want a bed,
yeah,
and as a human being we need to eat, and so these are some of the most fundamental things we need in life, and if you can produce products or offerings surrounding this, you're going to be in business. Now, I think with with the way things are going, I think, you know, if you can produce something, you know, very impactful and disruptive in that sector, in any of those things, these core human drives, and you're gonna have some success, if not a lot of success. um like, if you were to talk to like somebody who's about to like, because, you know, and I make a point that you are pre-revenue, but you are still gung-ho and you know, going for this, like,
yeah.
what about someone else who's about to join this journey? Like, what would you say to them? Like, don't save up some money first, go on a Kickstarter thing, get some investment money? Or would you say, look, just get it together the way you did, just make it happen, just go through the ropes?
I think the thing that people probably don't spend enough time on is talking to their audience and understanding how they're going to speak to their audience. Um, for us with these research chefs, I've spent quite a bit of time getting to know the community. We've joined the two certifying organizations. I'm actually on the board for one of them, and I'm helping them with marketing. So it's like we get to test out all the ways to talk to them. And I specify the ways to talk to them because I think marketing is a lot more than just selling people. Because they're telling us what they want and their preferences and what they care about, and it's not just us saying like, we have a thing for you, give us money please, but it's a relationship, it's a conversation. And I think understanding not just who those people are, I think, especially at business schools, like, oh, I've made the psychographic. It's, people living in Boston between the ages of 27 and 32 who earn this much money and like this and this. And it's like, okay, cool. Where are those people? What stores do they go to? Like, where are you going to find them? Like, how are you going to talk to them? What social media channels are, I think people under emphasize that. I think they say, oh, I built this great app or I built this thing and, it's so good. It solves this problem. And I've talked to like 5 people. It's like, okay, there are 5 people that doesn't scale because you went to talk to each of them. Where are you going to go from there?
You need your audience. You need that target buyer big.
Yeah.
Marketing is key. That's just the basics. Like you have to have a big list of people to promote to. And because it turns anything real. It's like it's almost like it sounds so crude when you say it like this, but if you have a huge email list or a massive influence over like a social platform, it's almost like they're like all those names like a big ATM machine. It's like you can create an offer and present it, and then you can have an expected result in terms of conversion. And so you can even pre-sell stuff, the concept. There's so many different ways that you can actually build a business based on good communication and having that. It's not always just about a direct sell. It doesn't have to be that. As long as you're interacting and having that conversation, and it's an ongoing conversation, whether that's through consistent marketing, whether that's through any kind of other platform, like if you're doing podcasts, I mean, you could be doing so much, and I can only imagine you're being stretched and pulled in so many different directions. It's kind of tricky to pick the right direction, but yeah, I 100% agree with you that if there's one big takeaway for people, it is the marketing.
Yeah. And I think, you always just have to keep them in mind. And also understand when, you're probably the subject area expert in like the technology. So if someone, if one of my customers says like, oh, I don't think you can do that, I just nod and smile like, no, I know that I can do that, but I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. It's okay. So I think you have to sort of have that filter too.
I can see that. I mean, I think sometimes there's a case for it, and and then there's a case against it. It's like you kind of have to be tactful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%.
You got to know when to do it, when not to do it. When do you need to put the mic drop down? When do you need to like say this is how it's done? Because I am the expert, and you just don't know. And I'm going to tell you how this is going to work. And then there's also that time where it's like, okay, let me hear you out. Let me cater to this and see if I can produce a solution differently.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll be saying there will be an unexpressed need or desire or fear within that. And that I think is the really important thing to pull out of that. I spoke to someone recently in the real estate industry, and I asked about the potential for, moving into commercial real estate in, 5 years. We're not doing that yet. And I got the feedback like, oh yeah, that's not a good idea. And I was thinking about it afterwards, like, that's really unfortunate because like we had previously had really good conversations, and I just said, hey, what happens if your entire industry like decreases by half or by 2/3? And of course they're going to come back with like, oh, that's not going to happen. This is a bad idea. So, I think part of it's like how you ask the questions. I think part of it is there's another human on the other side, and they're gonna clam up if you say certain things, and just
Yeah, they need to
being able to
protect
read that.
their. Yeah, you got
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
careful
yeah,
sometimes because people will do the most to protect their own integrity. They'll do the most to protect their own position of
yeah,
power, of influence. So, you can't just go stepping on people's toes until you are the person who can, essentially. So yeah, you do have
yeah.
to be, like I say, tactful. But yeah, that's brilliant. How do people find you? Where do they go? And how do they
Uh,
buy one of those boxes? Like how do I get one?
so we have a waiting list.
Mhm.
You can go to atlasurbanfarms.com and join our email list, and we will be communicating via that. Actually, one of the things I need to get started is a monthly newsletter. So we're working on that. You can follow us on Instagram, Atlas Urban Farms. We're not super active on there, but if you want to learn a lot about the early journey, but even before we had this product, before we pivoted to restaurants, a lot of the info is on there, as well as some recipes and sort of like, here's how you keep plants alive, even if they're not hydroponic. Um, and LinkedIn as well. And if people are interested, they can find me, Connor Harbison. I have a flower beard on there. I think I'm the only person with a flower beard. Uh, Definitely the only person named Connor Harbison with a flower beard on LinkedIn. So yeah, always happy to talk. Always happy to talk about food, hydroponics, technology, and cool stuff like that.
Awesome, man. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for taking the time to be here on the Distro Boss podcast. I'd like to check in with you in the future and see how your company's
absolutely.
coming along. Yeah, see how you're
Yes,
growing,
thank
how
you.
you're scaling, see if you had any new problems. We'll see what what I'll do. I'll look out for a piece of news, and I know there's going to be something soon in the world of vertical farm and grow your own at home. And I know that's going to be something. Well, that's always in the news, and I think there's going to be some big shifts in the very near future because there's a lot of
Yeah,
money. I know at least in the UK and Europe, where there's hell of a lot of investment money being moved into like the build out of these urban farms within cities, and the case being made for like, look, we don't want our apple traveling for like 8 days before it reaches my home, and the
yeah,
fact that the majority of this apple is actually now just sugar content as opposed to all the goodness that an apple initially had when it was picked from the tree. So
yeah,
there's a lot there, and like I say, I think it's a growth market, and I think it would be great to, when we pick up on this news, we see other opportunities, maybe just have a talk about that stuff. It would be great to have you back
yeah. It'd
on.
be great.
All right, bye for now.